benvenuti a tutti. Possiamo cominciare in italiano e dopo cambiare la lingua, ok? Mi chiamo Jim Grummer, sono direttore del Centro di Spiritualità Ignaziana. Benvenuti a tutti. Stasera il Centro di Spiritualità Ignaziana della Pontificia Università Gregoriana prosegue con il secondo incontro del ciclo di 3 conferenze con lo scopo di analizzare il rapporto tra la riconciliazione e la spiritualità ignaziana. Giovedì scorso, padre Rolfi Pinto ha analizzato il tema di riconciliazione fra i primi gesuiti, in un contesto più ampio, perché lui ha spiegato un po' dell'interesse della Compagnia di Gesù di riconciliazione adesso. Giovedì prossimo, il 29 novembre, il padre Martín Morales ci parlerà dell'esperienza molto complicata dei gesuiti che hanno operato nell'America del Sud per un lungo periodo. Oggi abbiamo un esperto che ha sperimentato personalmente l'importanza di riconciliazione. Padre Mac Cuarta parlerà della sua esperienza durante i conflitti dell'Irlanda del Nord. Nato nel 1957, è entrato a far parte della Compagnia di Gesù nel 1980. E lui è molto umile, e quando abbiamo richiesto un curriculum vitae, lui ha detto soltanto: sono un gesuita irlandese. Ma c'è sempre la possibilità di un po' di informazione. Lui ha studiato teologia a Francoforte prima della sua ordinazione nel 1990. Lui è stato assistente del maestro di novizi. Ha vissuto per 10 anni nell'Irlanda del Nord in una comunità della compagnia ubicata in un quartiere popolare. E anche lui è un storico. Lui ha studiato a Queen's University a Belfast. Lui è uno storico dell'Irlanda moderna in questo senso, che lui ha pubblicato diversi libri e saggi, tra i quali c'è Ulster 1641, Aspects of the Rising, The Plantation of Leitrim 1620 to 1641, Catholic Revival in Kilmore Diocese 1603 to 1641, Religious Violence Against Settlers in South Ulster 1641 to 1642, Papal Privileges for Ulster Churches, 1608. And he just published a book, as the editor of a book, Henry Piers's Continental Travels, 1595 to 1598, which you can get at a discount from Cambridge University Press. Un po' di pubblicità. Adesso è dal 2010, lui è archivista della Compagnia di Gesù presso la Curia Generalizia a Roma. E non c'è niente, nothing more to say, but welcome, Father Mac Cuarta.
Allora, vi ringrazio della vostra presenza qui stasera e dell'accoglienza del padre Jim Grummer. E mi scusi di dover passare alla lingua inglese, perché questo tocca alla mia esperienza del tutto personale. Dunque la lingua madre è più adatta a questa condivisione stasera. Dunque, as the Brexit negotiations between the United Kingdom and the European Union stumble towards some conclusion, the issue of the Irish border looms ever larger like a gathering cloud on the horizon. The frontier between Northern Ireland and the independent Ireland, virtually ignored in English discussion of Brexit up to now, moves centre stage. Let's hear what Winston Churchill said 100 years ago, just after the First World War, about this same disputed Irish border. I quote, "Then came the Great War. Every institution almost in the world was strained. Great empires have been overturned. The whole map of Europe has been changed. The position of countries has been violently altered. The modes of thought of men, the whole outlook on affairs, the grouping of parties, all have encountered violent and tremendous changes in the deluge of the world. But as the deluge subsides and the waters fall short, we see the dreary steeples of Fermanagh and Tyrone emerging once again. The integrity of their quarrel is one of the few institutions that have been unaltered in the cataclysm which has swept the world," unquote. So I would like to share with you this evening how I, as part of a small Jesuit community, tried to respond to the integrity of that quarrel. These are my personal reflections, largely from the years 1990 to 1995. So I'm not speaking on behalf of Irish Jesuits, much less are they offered as a rounded or deeply researched record of events. I begin with some personal background. It was an August evening in 1969. Then, aged 12, I was at home. We lived in a town in independent Ireland, but on the border with Northern Ireland, just 20 minutes distant by car. With my parents, we older children were watching the evening news on TV. In Belfast, about 90 minutes from where we lived, streets of small, tightly packed houses were in flames. A mob from the neighbouring Protestant areas had come to burn out those living in the small Catholic ghetto. The police of the Northern Ireland government, a government under single-party rule since its establishment in 1921, the police were present at the scene. Clearly, however, they were unable to defend those under attack. A forced displacement of a whole community was unfolding before our eyes. We had been following the civil rights marches underway in Northern Ireland for the previous year. But the street burnings in Belfast that summer made a particular impression on me. For just 2 weeks before, I was in Belfast, in those very streets. I was visiting a grand-aunt and an extensive tribe of cousins of various generations. She and her husband had lived in that area for over 50 years. When their daughters married, they lived in a street around the corner. The young boy cousins, about my own age, were technical. They had a Protestant granddad, and so they were technical. On that visit, one of these boys showed me his homemade radio set. We could listen in to the police cars as they were patrolling around the neighborhood. So I became fascinated by the unfolding Northern Ireland crisis. On Saturday afternoons in our town square, we listened to fiery speakers from the emerging militant national struggle against the Northern Ireland state. There was the occasional riot. On 9th of August 1971, we listened at home on radio to reports of the British security forces' dawn raids against Catholic homes across the north. Men were rounded up and interned without trial, hence the word internment. While this was happening in the early morning, the womenfolk were out on the streets. They rattled the bin lids on the ground to make a huge noise. Later on, at my school, there were collections for families of the so-called men, the men behind the wire, referring to the specially created internment camps. These internees or prisoners used to carve Celtic crosses in wood. These artifacts were smuggled out and raffled, as happened in our school. To give families a break from this tension, the Teaching Brothers organised a summer holiday scheme. My family hosted a boy from Derry, Northern Ireland, for several weeks. The morning the hated Northern Ireland regime collapsed in March 1972, our teachers at school disappeared for a lengthy coffee break. They were watching developments unfold in London on TV, as the Northern Ireland Prime Minister was called, and the British Prime Minister informed him that the regime was being suspended. These events helped nurture my growing interest in history. So as a 16-year-old, I made a special study of the emergence of the Unionist movement in British politics, a stance supported by most Northern Irish Protestants. Moving forward, in the mid-1980s, I was then a Jesuit student, and I was teaching in the Jesuit school in Galway on Ireland's Atlantic coast. After 15 years of violence and instability in Northern Ireland, Southern Irish society did not want to engage with the apparently intractable situation. While the students I was trying to teach were familiar with the nationalist and Republican story of struggle against England, the colonial struggle against England, almost all had no experience of Northern Protestants. Further, that they had no direct exposure to the current conflict. Jesuit General Father Pedro Arrupe's vision of forming men and women for others has always inspired me. Together with my companion, another young Jesuit in the school, we wanted to help the youngsters to engage with this part of our country's life. So, traveling by minibus, we used to bring groups aged 15 to 17 years old for a weekend in the north. For most, it was the first time they had ever met Northern Catholics and Protestants, and the first time they heard the stories of these communities. We visited the graves of the 1981 hunger strikers. They saw the political murals honouring Republican martyrs. Long-haired Bobby Stans, probably about 23 or 24 when he died, who had died on hunger strike just a few years before. Other murals proclaimed British identity. King William, the Protestant victor at a battle in 1690, on his white horse, young apprentices, young men, closing the gates of the city of Derry against the besieging Catholic army in the same war. And they met the security forces. In Belfast, returning to our minibus after a walkabout, a police patrol was waiting for us, flanked on either side by masked soldiers brandishing rifles. Our vehicle was parked beside a police station, as always, heavily fortified. One of the youngsters had taken photos. The police were clearly not happy. When questioned why he was taking photos of the premises, the young photographer gave the perfect answer. "I've never seen anything like this building in my life before." We were let go. A particularly nerve-wracking moment had passed. We also visited various community centres, usually in working class areas which bore the brunt of the political violence. I recall the quiet fortitude, the deep Christian faith of some of the animators of these centres. They were people rooted in their communities, but radiating some sense of hope in the midst of chaos, anxiety, and communal resentment. On another occasion, in a loyalist or British, extreme British area, the lady in charge graciously made us at home. As we were sipping tea together, the door opened, 3 young men marched in, said nothing, kicked a few chairs, and walked out. The pursuit of dialogue and mutual understanding, I sensed, was not universally shared. At times, those who welcomed us were taking a risk. Visits such as ours brought, I hope, some support and encouragement to envision and work towards a different future. For the duration of the Troubles from the late 1960s until the late 1990s, almost 30 years, the religious and political leader Ian Paisley was the personification of Ulster Protestant intransigence. To every political initiative of whatever type, big or small, the answer seemed to be, Ulster says no. On one of these school trips, we arranged to attend one of Ian Paisley's usual Sunday evening services. The ushers received us warmly at the church. The modern church was packed. In his address, Dr. Paisley acknowledged the group from the Jesuit school in Southern Ireland. In his brusque and colourful fashion, the leader hoped that we noted he had, quote, neither horns on my head nor a tail out my behind. That, in fact, he was not the devil incarnate. One of the boys fainted and had to be revived. Eventually, over 10 years later, as we know, Ian Paisley became one of the pillars of the new shared government in the era of peace. Weeks after being ordained priest in the summer 1990, I was missioned to join the 4-man Jesuit community living in a rundown housing estate. This place had among the worst social indices in Northern Ireland. Worst poverty, unemployment, short life expectancy. The town, Portadown, lay on the ethnic fault line within Northern Ireland, between the Protestant or British majority in the east of Northern Ireland and the Catholic majority in the west. For 200 years, the town had been renowned as a flashpoint for intercommunal tensions. A few kilometres away, in 1795, the Protestant grouping called the Orange Order, after William of Orange, the Protestant victor, the Orange Order was founded. It remained a significant force in the region's political and social fabric until the reforms of the 1970s. And indeed, it was partly for this reason that the Jesuit province opted for this location when it became possible to open a house in Northern Ireland in 1980. In doing so, the Irish Jesuits were inspired by the Church's call for solidarity with the poor and by the emphasis on, quote, reconciling the estranged, unquote, in the Society of Jesus Foundation document of 1540. The companions opted to live among those suffering not only socially and economically, but also in a situation where ethnic, denominational, and cultural tensions were particularly in evidence. By 1990, the Jesuit presence in this place had survived for 10 years against the background of the Troubles. There was, at that time, no prospect of peace. The Jesuits had arrived in 1980 at the time of the hunger strikes by the Irish Republican Army, IRA, prisoners, seeking the return of political status as prisoners. 14 young men from the closely knit Northern Catholic community of about 600,000 were to die on hunger strike. The process involved a massive popular mobilization, marches, black flags in public places, attacks on prison personnel, mainly Protestant, and highly political funerals. One prisoner, Bobby Sands, was elected as Member of Parliament. As a Member of Parliament, when the young man died, he was accorded the habitual obituary in the London Times, and he was changed from Bobby Sands to Robert Sands, MP. Right. Shortly afterwards, he died while on hunger strike. The Protestant community viewed these men as terrorists who were bombing town centres and killing their menfolk, members of the locally recruited security forces. In addition, a murky loyalist or extreme British campaign was also underway from within the Protestant community. Loyalist gunmen were killing Catholics, often at night. In some instances, rumours were rife of the covert involvement of sections of British security services in collusion with these squads. Our area where we lived was part of the Murder Triangle, one of the 3 localities within the territory of Northern Ireland which suffered most killings during the Troubles. As neighbour, work colleague, or family member, every Catholic, it seemed, knew someone who had been killed in this way. I arrived in the Jesuit community Portadown in September 1990. Peace came exactly 4 years later, 94. Thanks to the contributions of the Jesuits past and present, over the previous 10 years, over the 1980s, I realized that there were about 3 dimensions to the Jesuit presence in that place. 1, a simple presence in the neighborhood where we lived. 2, social and pastoral service, largely within the Catholic community. And 3, building relationships with the Protestant community, combined with theological and historical reflection on the ethnic and denominational roots of those tensions. I want to speak to the first dimension. Above all, we lived in the area. We were highly visible. I got a bike, and in a small town and even smaller neighborhood, one soon became quite recognizable. Neighbors knew us, and they knew what we were cooking for dinner, and we became friends. Our door was always open. We were always ready to have a chat. A Jesuit brother in our group kept our feet firmly on the ground. A second strand was the social and pastoral service. The Jesuit priests helped out in the local parish. One newly arrived man introduced himself at Sunday Mass. My name is such and such, Jesuit priest, recovering alcoholic. He ran a very well-attended Alcoholics Anonymous grouping in our house. He inspired incredible loyalty among those whose lives he touched. Some people lived under enormous pressure because of the political and security situation. Men and women in vulnerable situations felt they would receive understanding, acceptance, and guidance, including those with complicated relationship and family situations, and individuals and families facing anguish from the violence. In the parish, the week of guided prayer opened the sacred scriptures for many. Evening adult education groups met in the kitchen. People discussed Irish history, continental politics, the rise of Germany, all sorts of things around our kitchen table. Through these experiences, people grew in confidence and vision. Faced with about 60% unemployment in the area, one of our companions, working with locals, established the Drumcree Cooperative. It began as a chip shop selling fast food, then a small local newspaper, and then a simple hut or small building for school activities, after-school activities for children. Not without growing pains, plenty of rows and tense discussions between the people involved, the small group continued and developed in confidence. I recall a derelict factory site near where we lived. Every year on the anniversary of internment without trial, 9th of August, gangs of youths would riot on the road and petrol bomb the factory. Coinciding with the emergence of peace, with the ceasefires of autumn '94, the cooperative established a link with the business and civic community, largely Protestant. In this way, the premises, with its broken windows and barbed wire, was transformed. A business centre for small enterprises emerged. Where once hooded youths threw firebombs, now 50 or 60 people hurried in and out every day to their place of work. Not for the first time, I reflected that in building peace, jobs are essential. A third strand was an openness with regard to both communities by our Jesuit companions to engaging with the deeper underlying issues in this conflict. These included identity, questions relating to a community's past. What's our story? Who are we? Where have we come from? What does our faith community hold dear? Jesuits had been willing to face the historic, the denominational and political issues underlying the divisions in Northern Ireland society. As a group, they valued the goal of seeking to understand the Protestant worldview. For this, the Jesuit tradition of learned ministry was significant. A background in theology and history was particularly helpful. They were men open to forming relationships with individuals and groups within the Protestant community, particularly against the background of violence, killing, and destruction. A grouping which had emerged in Portadown was the Clergy Fraternal, a social gathering of clergy, both Catholic and those of the mainline Christian denominations. Over the years, friendships developed, and for our part, we used to invite individuals to our community for soup and sandwiches at lunch, always a time of fruitful and relaxed exchange. A guiding insight was that of the double minority. Traditionally, Catholics were a minority within Northern Ireland, about 35% at partition in 1921, today about 50%. Protestants as a community, however, were more conscious of themselves as a beleaguered minority on the entire island of Ireland. So hence, we can see the blue part is where the areas of dense British population, and we can see that, a bit like a glacier, they have moved up to the northeast corner of Ireland. So what's left after that for their community would be the sea and back to Scotland. So that sort of geographical distribution, their concentration in a small corner, even within the greater part of Northern Ireland, is significant for what is known as the siege mentality, that they are a small group, a minority on the whole island of Ireland, and that they feel the cultural pressures arising from that sense of being a minority. Okay. The reflexes of both communities, therefore, thus derived from a deep sense of insecurity. Based in Portadown, Jesuit companion Brian Lennon, among many other activities, was instrumental in bringing together several small reflection groups. The Faith and Politics group comprised a few people with a theological background, Catholic and Protestant. They met and prepared papers offering fresh theological perspectives on dimensions to the conflict. Brian ensured that these musings were issued as pamphlets. He followed a similar process, but at a popular and local level, with the Drumcree Faith and Justice group. In our area, an annual ritual was the traditional Orange or Militant Protestant Parade, which passed through our Catholic area each July. The Orange festivities celebrated the victory of the Protestant King William over the Catholic King James in 1690. This battle of the victory led to a long period of Protestant political and social supremacy in Ireland. And with bands, with music, with loud drums and large banners symbolizing this historic victory, the annual event ritualized the humiliation experienced by residents of the town's Catholic ghetto. For the Orangemen, however, this was their traditional route to a church service, hallowed by youths since the 1790s. Faced with the rioting provoked by this parade, the Faith and Justice group offered alternatives, a team of international observers, and a simple tea party to which the parading Orangemen, with their musical bands, were invited. So on arriving in September 1990, I knew I was stepping into established furrows of ecumenical, of social justice and cultural analysis, rooted in a particular local neighbourhood. I had just got off the train in this alien situation. It was my first time to live in Northern Ireland, with a low-scale war underway. The next day, my companions promptly disappeared on holiday. I was alone. While I appreciated their great trust in me, I must say I did feel nervous. In those early weeks, I made several contacts with the Protestant community, contacts of a cultural nature. These proved to be enduring and rich in potential for building bridges. I saw a news item in the local paper inviting new members to join the men's choir, singing. On inquiring, I found that it was, like almost all social life in Northern Ireland at the time, in effect, though not intentionally, a Protestant grouping. They met in the local golf club. I had never stood in a golf club in my life. I recall the British flag, the Union Jack fluttering outside. Walking through the glass door with my Irish name and Southern accent, I felt not for the first time I was stepping out of conventional norms of behaviour. Over the years, friendships were made through singing at many church events, harvest thanksgivings, concerts across the country, TV broadcasts and carol services. Each year we travelled to an international choral festival in the Deep South. I came to appreciate the wonderful suppers provided, a particular charism of the Ulster Protestant community. We supported each other in our bereavements, and in that way I got to know the Protestant community from the inside. Some events stand out. The British Legion for former British soldiers and their families invited us to sing at their event. I thought it would be a simple concert. In fact, it was a gathering for families of soldiers killed, not only killed in Northern Ireland, but elsewhere in Afghanistan and in Iraq. In a secular liturgy, these men were remembered. Their mothers, wives, sisters were in the audience. Ending with a shower of paper poppies, the symbol of the British Legion, onto the stage, the common humanity of grief, loss, and the supporting bonds of community came home to me. During my time in Portadown, the choir was a constant and ever-deepening point of contact. The Irish national rugby team is supported by both North and South, Catholic and Protestant. At international matches, however, at that time, the Irish national anthem, was a bone of resentment for the Protestants, for some Protestants. When peace broke out, a special rugby hymn was commissioned to replace the contentious anthem. Our choir was chosen to launch this song, Ireland's Call, on national TV. Travelling by bus to a choir event, I got talking with our chairman. We discussed possible future events. I suggested singing at the garden party of the Irish president in her official residence in Dublin. The committee discussed this and agreed. So in June 2009, we, predominantly from the Unionist community, travelled south to sing for the Irish president, herself a Belfast Catholic. In the early 1970s, a sectarian gang smashed up her family home. Now, she and her husband welcomed her fellow Northerners warmly. It was a small step in the new dance linking our once bitterly divided communities. Years afterwards, members recalled that visit as the high point of the choir's history. Another contact made in those early weeks was with a group of young Protestant professionals. They wanted to form a citizens group dedicated to fostering the middle ground between the two communities. They invited me to speak to their group in a member's home. They formed what is known as a house church. This radical group had its origins in the main Presbyterian church in the town, well known for its conservative theological and political stance. These people and their young families had formed a breakaway group. Now they wanted to move into the civic sphere. They needed a few tame Catholics like myself. I arrived. Together, our civic group planned a program which included public debates on very contentious issues. Schooling, separate or together. Policing reform. Membership at that time about 95% Protestant. The Anglo-Irish Agreement of 1986 between London and Dublin, establishing for the first time an official nationalist input into how Northern Ireland was run. The agreement was anathema to broad unionist opinion. We invited Garret FitzGerald, Irish Prime Minister, who signed this accord with Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister. We invited Garret to address one of our meetings. Speakers from the floor heckled the Irish statesman. They stamped their feet so as to drown his words. But gradually, they listened to his vision of an agreed Ireland. I salute the courage of the Protestant family who had us all to supper beforehand. We also held a joint carol service before Christmas. In Northern Ireland, many Protestant denominations had theological difficulties with shared prayer with Catholics. To have any liturgical event together was problematic. The spiritual siege mentality was, of course, reinforced by the reality of ongoing political violence in the form of bombings and killings. So the form of the liturgy and the place had to be trashed out in committee until all of us were content. I vividly recall the carol service of December 1992. And that year, about 14 people in the surrounding area had been killed in political violence. In small, tightly knit communities, everyone was touched personally. In this situation, we pushed the boat out, and then we had the service in the Catholic chapel for the first time in decades. The chapel was in darkness, save for a huge number of candles. People were welcomed personally at the entrance. The town's ladies' choir, again predominantly Protestant, had agreed to sing. Their presence in the Catholic Church at that time was hugely significant. The young Protestant co-leader gave the address. He recited the poem, "Bear in mind these dead." Then, in sonorous voice, he slowly read out the names of those killed. We knew these people and their families. A young policewoman, one of 5 or 6 killed in an attack on a police station. 2 Catholic teenagers gunned down in the family kitchen while watching TV. A group of 3 local members of the IRA, militant nationalist militia, tortured and executed by their peers, their naked bodies dumped on a small country lane. The parents of some of these victims were in the congregation. It was a liturgy in which people together faced the raw pain of their grief. The family huddled around the Bethlehem manger offered us some glimmer of hope for a different and better future. Another initiative was to explore some of the historical resentments which permeates the Northern Ireland landscape. Portadown lies on the ethnic fault line. The fissure goes deep. The Protestant community are descended from the colonists who arrived in the 1610s. After 30 years, the native Irish revolted in 1641. There was ethnic cleansing of the settlers. They were robbed, stripped, and expelled. It was November, so winter. In long lines, they walked towards the ports. One of the most iconic events has shaped Protestant consciousness down to our own times. It occurred at the bridge over the river in our town, Portadown. Up to 80 settlers were drowned. Our small citizens group decided to organize a conference on reconciliation and memory based on this historic event. Renowned academics were invited. The town's Unionist and Protestant mayor participated. Thanks to the public relations skills of our Protestant co-leader, on the morning of the event, a queue stretched along the street in front of the town hall. Unusually, Catholic townspeople came there in significant number. In a society where silence over divisive topics is the rule in mixed company, ancient grievances were aired in public. Catholics as colonial victims, Protestant memories of massacre. A follow-up historical publication, which I edited, is now in its third edition. The text, I understand, has been used in discussion groups in orange halls across the region. The idea was to present the fruits of academic research in a popular and accessible way. In this, it succeeded. Irish history was taught in, and still is, in Catholic schools. By contrast, in the state schools in Northern Ireland, effectively Protestant in intake and ethos, only English history was taught. We weren't taught any Irish history at school, my Protestant friends used to say. We want to know more. A groundbreaking essay was on the violence against English settlers living in County Armagh, where we lived. In the native revolt of 1641, the author provided a sober, comprehensive study of the evidence for this event. Her conclusion was that about 1 in 6 of the settler population was killed, certainly less than some of the wilder guesstimates to be found in Protestant historiography over the centuries. But it validated historical Protestant victimhood in the face of Catholic denial. That essay has become a model of how to explore violence in the ethnic breakdown that occurred at that time. Other encounters were more low-key and individual, but nonetheless real. Place assumes huge importance, as we all know, in ethnically divided societies. As well as cultural and interdenominational projects, a whole range of seemingly banal and inconsequential issues provide opportunities for engagement with what is known as the other side. A new radio antenna had to be installed on our roof. The technician we chose belonged to a firm with links to the Protestant Orange Order. The young man arrived before breakfast one summer morning. He had installed the aerial and left our neighbourhood before our neighbours knew who was there. The technician's prudence indicates that in the Troubles, negotiating travel was a life skill. Every Sunday at Mass from the altar, I would see a family with a boy in a wheelchair, victim of a sectarian attack in the town some years previously. So to the deep existential questions. Which barber would I frequent? As with many activities, one could stay within the ghetto, but I chose to cross the river to the East Bank, the majority Protestant area. On my first visit, I was laconic. The newspapers were different, English, not Irish. Conscious of my accent, I just pointed to my head and indicated scissors. Over the years, visits became more chatty. Gradually, the barber and I discussed holidays, family, and discovered a common interest in cinema. When there was no one else present, we gingerly broached the current political situation. Similarly, when buying takeaway food, I would cross the river, join the queue, and deliver my order at the counter in a hushed voice. Other moments, however, were more painful. On a visit to a neighbouring town one morning, a road was blocked. I had to come back. Shortly after 8 a.m., a businessman was leaving home for work. His car exploded near the driveway and he was killed. I made inquiries. He was a leading figure in the Orange movement and had served a short while part-time in the local security forces. The funeral service some days later was in the main Presbyterian church. When I arrived, the church was already packed. I had to sit up near the family, in fact, close to the victim's mother. Leading political figures were present. The congregational singing raised the roof. I had hoped to slip away unobtrusively. However, I had to wait until the entire congregation had filed out before offering condolences to the wife and the two beautiful teenage daughters. I had plenty of time to observe them, their faces racked in pain. I dreaded how I might be received. I mumbled my few inadequate words, saying who I was and where I was from. Their faces at once brightened, they smiled, and they all said, "We are so happy you've come. Thank you so much for your support." After a long conflict, the Northern Ireland Troubles lasted about 30 years, violence ceases, more or less. Peace has to be built. Especially in its early stages, it involves compromise, ambiguity, resentment against perpetrators of violence, and seemingly insuperable clashes over the place of former combatants in the new order. Yet there was a wonderful sense of relief in autumn '94, as first the militant nationalists and then the loyalist squadrons declared ceasefires. A photo of a small boy playing with a ball in a Belfast street conveyed the mood. On the wall behind him was neatly painted, "Time for peace." Some weeks later, the British soldiers exchanged their heavy helmets, which masked their features, for soft caps. For the first time, we could see their faces. While politicians debated, we on the ground wondered what we could do to celebrate the long yearned for peace. We had heard that for several years in a village near Dublin, the local community, Catholic parish, Anglican parish, Presbyterian congregation, together had worked all winter on a passion play. It was performed each year in Holy Week. We said to ourselves, something similar could take place here in Portadown. Nothing like this had ever happened before. With peace, The space for doing things together was opening up. There was a sense that now it would be safe for people to cross into neighborhoods which before were dangerous for someone of their grouping. The pastors were responsive to the idea. So it was arranged that speakers from the village near Dublin would come and address congregations at the Sunday services of the different churches. People came forward to volunteer. About 100 people became involved. The mix was truly amazing. There were young schoolboys whose fathers were still in prison for Republican or strong militant Irish nationalist activity. There were men who were pillars of the local Presbyterian business and professional community. There were working class Protestants with family members in the security forces. For rehearsals, we moved across the ethnic and sectarian patchwork of the town, shuttling between the various parish halls. Towards the end, we used the town hall, with the British flag still fluttering overhead. It adjoined the fortress-like police station. Catholics considered this area as alien territory. In the dark evenings of that winter and early spring, several times a week we met as our young professional director coaxed us forward. People divided by fear and violence could at last relax. Space for conversation, impossible just a few months ago, was now emerging. Older people could reconnect with former neighbours and work colleagues. The abrupt and very bitter population shifts of the early 1970s had ruptured relationships. The businessman, hitherto under pressure to contribute to paramilitary groupings, could exchange civilities with a youngster of a militant family. And in a deeper but unarticulated way, the drama, the tension, the suffering, the betrayal of Holy Week provided the backdrop to our newfound coexistence and indeed collaboration. Every seat was taken when finally the curtain went up on our performance. Language was yet another neuralgic point. Until the Great Famine of the mid-19th century, Irish was the language of the poorer Catholic population across the country. Thereafter, the use of the language declined steeply. In the 20th century, language revival was the professed aim of Irish political nationalism. In Northern Ireland, nationalists, largely synonymous with Catholics, resented that their ancient language was neglected, if not despised, in the British state. Unionists, overwhelmingly Protestant, feared that in a militant nationalist victory, Irish would be used to penalise their community. As they saw it, the language was yet another front in the ethnic war. Place names would be changed. Irish would be compulsory for public sector employment. Culturally, as well as militarily, their dread was expulsion from the only homeland they had ever known. In war, the space for exploring cultural ambiguities and the rich tapestry of any community's history shrinks. The memory that Belfast Protestants had contributed to the Celtic revival was erased. With town centres being ripped apart by bombs, the rich Presbyterian links with Gaelic Scotland lay dormant and unexplored. With peace, cultural space was emerging. My schooling was in Irish, and I used Irish in ministry. Within a few weeks of the ceasefires, I organised the first public Irish language forum on the peace process. Among the audience were men who had learned the language while in jail for militant activity. Political representatives from the different parties were invited to speak. Among those was a speaker from a liberal unionist or British grouping, a Protestant who was capable of giving a speech in Irish. He put his party's viewpoint, including the phrase in elegant Irish, to the effect that he was loyal to the Queen. I drink to the health of the Queen. Olam Sláinte na Banriana. We had never heard this type of language before. He shared the panel with a grandson of leader Eamon de Valera, a military leader in the 1916 revolt against Britain, who for 60 years remained at the centre of nationalist Irish political life. He was president of the country for 14 years. The personification, however, of the threat of a united Ireland for Northern Protestants. Another event was the presence of the Anglican Church of Ireland Archbishop of Dublin, himself a fluent speaker, as guest speaker at an Ulster Irish language dinner. In such small ways, the cultural glaciers were beginning to move. With peace, the Church of Ireland, the Anglican Communion in Northern Ireland too, was beginning gingerly to reconnect with its more inclusive dimension. About 10 years after the ceasefires, the official Irish translation of their liturgy was published. This was the occasion of a launch at their cathedral outside Belfast. The bishop, in a gracious and light-hearted way, used a few words of the language, while an Anglican prelate, born in Belfast, gave a fluent address in the language. A Presbyterian Gaelic choir from Glasgow, Scotland, sang the Psalms, as is their tradition. Before our eyes and ears, the Protestant Gaelic heritage was being reclaimed. So to conclude, working on the frontiers in Northern Ireland in those years, I felt sustained by the support of the Jesuit community, of my parents, whom I was able to visit every week, and the trust of my Jesuit superiors. The Jesuit tradition of scholarship in the area of Irish studies has always been an inspiration. The Society of Jesus' engagement with ecumenism and reconciliation in recent decades has also provided a horizon. Friendships in various forms have been sustaining. Evening chats in the home of a local self-taught Irish speaker who himself did time in Crumlin Road Jail. A small prayer group meeting in an Anglican couple's sitting room with excellent scones waiting us at the end of our prayer. Sharing in a tour of World War I battlefields in Belgium with a unionist cultural group led by a friend from my university days, and coming to a better understanding of the Presbyterian story through a lengthy bus trip across Scotland with the same group. I recall two women, one Catholic, the other Anglican, who shared this passion of building bridges between the communities. They were always ready to listen to me, to welcome and explore apparently crazy proposals. They both led by example. During the Loyalist workers' strike in 1974, when Northern Ireland ground to a halt, the Anglican lady in protest climbed over parked cars to defy the blockade. On another occasion, when the security forces blockaded the Catholic estate where we lived one Sunday during a standoff regarding a Loyalist parade, Mass was held in the open air. At the sign of peace, the Catholic mother walked over to the ranks of the young soldiers and shook hands, to her neighbour's fury. In these and similar ways, people took risks for peace and new relationships. At times, they faced incomprehension and disapproval. I feel privileged to have shared a part of that journey. Thank you very much.